everybody. This is Paul Herman, the Prince of Motivation and host of Zaka Presents My Journey. We're creating this vulnerable and positive platform where you can get inspired and motivated from different leaders from our community. Today, our guest is Alan Descarnol, who is the co-founder and CEO of Film Hub. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Paul. Good to be here.
Pleasure. The pleasure is all ours. Looking forward to hearing all about Film Hub and all the wonderful things you got going over there. But before we get into that, just give us a little bit more of your cultural background and where you grew up to start it
Aw-
off.
Awesome. So I have an interesting story. I was born in San Diego, but half Brazilian. Grew up back and forth between Brazil and San Diego. I'm a dual citizen. So I'm
Okay.
rocking both those passports. And both places are home for me.
Okay. Okay. So talk to me a little bit more about the cultures. I mean, that's two different places right there. So talk about the different cultures of those two.
Yeah. It's interesting. And it's even stronger for me because my parents split when I was super young. And so one household was very American, I would say, and one household was very Brazilian. The food, the meals, the way that I interacted with both parents, it was like living in completely two different lives when I was home in San Diego. Visiting grandma in Brazil was very different than
Okay.
visiting grandma in the US. Completely different experiences. The sense of just completely different ways of interacting
Mm,
ultimately.
mm, mm.
And my American family in the US, it was it was just a very different experience. It was like you have this kind of you get together, you're still a close family, but
Yep.
it's not that kind of like, you know, everyone together all the time, any given
Mm,
day that you had when
I
you're home
see.
in
I see.
Brazil. It's like the way I say it is sometimes it's like, you'd go to dinner with your grandparents when you're in the US, but in your home in Brazil, you'd have everything from like the 1 year old through the 88-year old sitting at the same table. And it was like no
Ah.
questions. It was just like it's very different there when you're thinking about it from that side. So that's a couple of things that are just like immediately like it's just completely different in that side.
I could only imagine that difference. Like you're one week you're over here, the next week you're on a vacation over here, and you're like, "Ah, it's totally different. It's totally different," and just kind of just adjusting to that as well. Now, did you have any time growing up in Brazil?
Yeah. So I went to high school in Brazil for a little while. I spent my summers down there very frequently. I had both sides, my grandfather, grandmother in Brazil. Um, And really, I think the big time for me when I really like ingrained in my Brazilian culture was when I went to high school there for a while. I got an incredible, interesting opportunity, and like one of the things like from a cultural perspective, that was hard for me is I was kind of spent a lot more time in my early days at home in San Diego on my American side, and didn't get enough time to spend with my Brazilian family in Brazil.
Mm,
And it was rough because like I had all these stories and like would see kind of bits and pieces of it. But as I was growing up, it was like kind of you felt this like longing actually to get back to Brazil and learn a bit more about it.
mm,
And so what I did was I actually learned, a lot of people have experienced kind of dual households. It's always a question of like, when do you learn the language?
true.
And I realized there was like missing out on this piece. And I had, um, due to a lot of different issues why I couldn't go to Brazil. Parents going through divorces and everything and all of this fun jazz.
Mm,
I didn't get enough spend enough time. And so I eventually finally started going to Brazil frequently but knew I had a lot to catch up on. And so I started learning Portuguese in the US, started taking classes from a private tutor, and
okay.
eventually um, decided to move to Brazil to go to high school for a little while. And
You
it
made the choice.
was, yeah,
Oh wow.
yeah, I
Okay.
made the choice. I was pretty entrepreneurial as a kid. I started importing car parts and had a car parts business. And I was like, if I'm doing this car parts business, I've got to begin, really ingrained in the culture. And so I said, hey, I'm packing bags, moving to Brazil for a little while, and got like thrown into a Brazilian high school there. I was,
Did they speak English?
a couple of my friends spoke a little bit of English, but I made very clear to all my friends there that I didn't want them to speak English with me at all, actually, because I wanted to learn Portuguese and I wanted to feel ultimately what it was like to be a Brazilian. And I was really lucky. I got introduced to a man who's one of my best friends to this day. His name's Guilherme. He'll have to listen to this at one point. And, was immediately thrown into this group of crazy kids, the kind of American Brazilian going to Brazil. They're like, wait, he's Brazilian, but he's not. He's like, he acts a little bit more like an American than a Brazilian. And it was like kind of in this weird, kind of cultural identity crisis. It's like, where do I belong?
Hmm.
I know I'm missing this part of being Brazilian, but I am here. I feel welcomed by these people that I'm here with, but I still don't feel like exactly at home.
Hmm.
And was in this like kind of in between area of, okay, where am I at home? And
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to be home in Brazil. And it took me a while there to kind of like really go through adjustments. Thankfully, I'm pretty extroverted. Um,
That
but
would
it
help.
was
That would help.
it helped. It definitely helped. But it took me a while to really like feel at home in my like, was a big part of my secondary culture ultimately.
Yeah.
And or primary culture in some ways. And that was a tough like adjustment period, but it was something I knew I needed because like I felt like
Yeah.
I didn't understand part of my family really.
And you could get
And
that, nowadays you could probably, Rosetta Stone, you could go to get a tutor, but you were like, no, I need to be a part of the culture.
yeah,
That's a big, especially at the age of like, you go into high school, you're saying you're like 12, 13, you're just saying to yourself, like, okay, like, what do I want? I can hang with my friends over here, or I could go find out who I really am,
yeah,
a piece of me. And I feel like that's very admirable to like kind of do at a very young age. And then to tell your parents, this is what I want to do, and then
yeah,
to stick to it, because you could have came back home, which you didn't. You're like, this is too hard, this is too complex, I'm fine with my friends over here, I'm good. But you went there, and again you said, I don't want to speak English, please speak Portuguese to me. That's another way of throwing yourself into the fire. But that's big. That is big. A lot of the stories that any of the guests have come onto the show, they talk about coming from where they were originally to America and having the same scenario that you went through. But yours is kind of reverse. You,
yeah.
you left America and you went back home, and you're like, how do I fit in? Do I even fit in? I don't walk or talk like them, but I am one of them. It's like it's one of those things that you're so confused, and especially at a young age, you're like, I just want it to work out. I just want to be accepted, right? But you kept
Yeah.
going. Yeah. What kept you motivated during this time to not quit and go back home to the U.S.?
Well, I think like the big thing for me was like it was more about really understanding my roots, right? And understanding like who I was ultimately and like, you know, my father telling stories and of him growing up and all these like silly things that he would discuss and talk about like he's like Alan, we go to the beach in a very different way in Brazil than you're used to here and we eat different things and like all these things like I'd seen bits and pieces of but like I was always a person that wanted to get that just like I love being dropped off in something weird ultimately and I
Okay.
like the uncomfortableness. And what kept me alive, honestly, through it was like I was just motivated by it. I loved it. It was like it was something completely new and different. And all of a sudden it was like you realize that like you're in this alternate world that like even the way you think about watching TV is different, right? Like at Brazil at like 5 p.m., people are going to a bar to
Yeah.
watch a telenovela. And you're like, wait, what? You go to a bar to
Where we
watch a
going?
TV
And I
show?
think you can drink earlier in Brazil, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know what age is it, right? Is it
Oh,
different?
you were drinking way earlier than 18 in Brazil.
I'm gonna do my homework at the bar, mom,
Yeah,
dad. Let's go
exactly.
get out there. That's
Yeah.
crazy. What do you can you share growing up in Brazil, like how did that immigrant background shape your like entrepreneurial spirit and like helped you to pursue that business lifestyle?
Yeah. So basically what I ended up doing is I kind of ended up in high school and kind of back and forth a lot, right? So as I was still doing like full 4 years in high school, but I was going back for summers and stuff like that. And so within that, it allowed me to kind of really like begin finally living both lives ultimately. And like I really like, I had my friends in Brazil, I had my friends in the US, and was able to kind of really get a feel for both sides. And I think the thing that um really kind of like kept kind of the spirit going was just like it's the wanting to learn something new. It's just
Mm.
like that's like that's what the entrepreneurial spirit is. It's just like
Yeah,
it's
true.
wanting to learn. It's like
Yeah,
it's just that thirst. Like that's what kept me going, honestly.
yeah. Okay, okay. Now, when you came back to the US, what year was this? So you went to high school in Brazil, but there's a transition. What year did you come back?
Oh, so I was going to so I went it was I was taking summers off basically in Brazil. And so my junior year, I spent the whole summer in Brazil going to high school there. So I come back, I'm 17. I am going back into my senior year of high school, and I'm like fresh off the plane. I've been going to Brazil. I've been in high school in Brazil, and then all of a sudden, I'm like senior year of high school in the US. And I remember this phone call to my dad being like, Dad, something's just like weird. Like it just felt like so weird. I was stepping into a school that was not where I had been for recent times. And I just like the way that I operated was different. And the
Mm.
funny thing is my dad said on that phone call, I remember this phone call very real. He's like, Ellen, he's like, well, the funny thing is like you walk different now. You don't know it, but you actually walk different.
Oh,
I
jeez.
was
What,
just like, what?
like literally walk different because you had a different type of bop or swag to you or something?
He's like, it got a little bit different bop. Like, he's like, and I'm like, I do? He's just like, yeah, you don't know it, but I noticed it.
That's crazy. But that's the culture.
Yeah.
That's the vibrant energy that it gives, right? It's just
Yeah.
contagious, infectious. That you just get off the flight and you're already walking differently.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's
Um,
what's up. That's what's up. Like, what were some of those struggles? Like when you came back to the U.S. now, right? So you were trying to at one point fit in Brazil. You
yeah.
finally found your way through there, got acclimated, and you found your community. You found your tribe. You come
Yeah.
back to the States. I'm assuming it's another struggle.
Yeah. I think, I was a type of person like, I mean, I grew up in San Diego and I always say that I never really fit perfectly in San Diego. I it
Okay.
just it was it was a total like surfer beach culture. Like I liked that, but I had like just a bit more of like an ambition to me. I like
Mm,
wanted to do more, and like I had amazing friends who were incredibly smart, right? Like these
yeah.
some brilliant folks, but they just kind of worked in a bit of a different way. Ultimately, is like it was a bit more relaxed. I joked around telling people like I was the East Coaster that happened to be born in San Diego.
Okay. Shout out to the East. I'm saying shout out to the East Coast. We do keep it moving over here.
No,
That
no, yeah,
West Coast
exactly.
lifestyle is different. It's like very laid back.
It's very laid back in the West Coast, and like
Very laid. There
I
are
now live
people
in New
still
York and feel a
moving.
bit more at home in that way. But the thing was though, so like it was just kind of like feeling a little bit out of place though, because like so many of my friends in San Diego, like born, raised in San Diego, um, you know, I always kind of identified a lot more with my Mexican friends in San Diego because we have such a good Mexican population in San Diego, just being so close to the border. And so like that's a group of friends like I always like really just understood and kind of worked more with. Whereas a
Mm-hmm.
lot of my friends that were from like, honestly like purely white families, like they just hadn't really done as much. They didn't understand the kind of the dual culture lifestyles.
Okay.
And
Yep. I can
and
see it.
that was kind of where it was just hard sometimes to adjust because I just didn't have as much in common, you know? And I think there's something about in the US when you have these kind of dual culture, tri-culture households, right?
Quad
Eh,
something.
Quad culture,
Yeah,
you name
yeah.
it, right? It's just
Shout out to
like,
the US, the melting
yeah, it's
pot.
just it's cool. It's like, and you've got this like immediate connection. And it's just like you've got your friend's grandmother who like doesn't speak a lick of English, and you go and say hi to them, and you're like, there's just a different vibe and feeling,
Yeah.
and that's I think the thing that was like really I missed a lot of the times where when I was home in San Diego.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I could agree with you on that because coming from my father's St. Lucian, my mother's Jamaican, but I was born in America. So being able to kind of like move around, in Jamaica, the patois, in St. Lucia, a lot of Creole, but then in America, and English. So like being able to be around all different, those three different areas in a sense, I felt like when I walked into places, I was like, okay, who I'm going to be today, right?
Yeah.
Let me brush
Yeah.
this off. Maybe I speak more of a in more patois today. Maybe I speak a little bit in the Creole, or just be in my American English dialect, right? So
Yeah.
it was just good to know that at one point I was afraid to actually showcase that because I didn't know if people would accept it. But then as
Yep.
I got older, I realized that it's truly an asset to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, like, the secondary language piece is really interesting. So, like, I actually ended up on a call with a partner of ours in Brazil today, and it's like there's also this little bit of like, when you're speaking multiple languages, your accent's, always a little bit less in one language than another. Your vocabulary is a little bit off.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
not as
yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah.
And, it was one of those hard things where like the way that I've kind of, gotten used to that, which has been like, it's just you have like this insecurity ultimately of like, you're like, uh-oh, like I want to like practice my language. I want to be speaking more. But guess what?
Mhm.
Like I'm not using business vocabulary in Portuguese every day, right? It's
That is
like,
true. That is
and
true.
so that, those calls and stuff get a little bit hard. And it's like that, just feeling that unease, right? Is real. And I had a really nice person on the phone today, and I spoke in Portuguese first for a little while just to break the ice. And I was like, hey, do you mind if I speak in English? Cause like, and I said exactly that. I was like, my vocabulary talking about these terms is not great in Portuguese. And so I think it's just
Okay.
easier. And I think just owning it sometimes is the key.
And you mentioned the word business. Let's talk
Yeah.
about that because I know you got a business degree at Wharton, right? Talk about your experience over there and how did that influence you to build and go into startups?
Yeah. So I went to Penn, and one of the reasons I went to Penn was because of the fact that it was like so international. There were a lot of Brazilians. That was one of the things I like. I stayed with Brazilians when I went to as a pre-freshman, got to know them. A lot of people that were interested in Brazil. I stayed with this program of folks that was all international students, and it just like gave me like I was like, oh, I feel like really at home amongst them. And a lot of them were from many different countries outside, but just having that kind of, dual cultures was really interesting for me. And went to Penn, really had no idea what I was going to do. I was like, I just
Okay.
showed up, like, I was just like, hey, what am I going to study? I like businesses. I don't know what I want to do in the future. And when you go to Penn, like especially in Wharton, everyone pushes you to go to finance.
True.
And
True, true, true.
I was like, I started doing some of the finance classes, and I was like, okay, I can kind of do this, but like, this is just boring. Like, this is just numbers moving on a page. I'm not actually creating anything. And sorry to my friends in finance that will say that they were
Yeah,
creating
I know,
things.
right? Shout out to people who find. But you said you had a very extroverted personality, right?
Yeah.
And you're already coming from a culture that's very vibrant. So you probably were like, look, I just need to get my hands on. I need to touch something. I need to feel.
Yeah, exactly. And I started trying to do the finance thing for a little while, and then I realized I didn't want to do it. But what I started doing was I got super involved in some extracurriculars. So one was in a fraternity for social life, but I was also in a theater
Okay.
production group called the Mask and Wig Club.
Okay. Talk to us
Which
about that theater.
Yeah, yeah. Theater is so my mom was the one actually that originally got me interested in theater, would take me to musicals and stuff as a kid. And I always just thought they were cool. I was like, this is fun. I like the sing-along nature of some of them. And but I was never a creative person myself. Like I am not a singer, dancer, actor. I played piano for a while, but never could actually was never very talented at it. And so I just wanted to find a way to be around it. And the Masquerade Club was great because I actually ran production for them. And so we put a full length comedic musical, 20 show run, took the show on tour once a year, all around the US. Um,
So
and
you were
that's
working
where I
on
kind of like
you were working in the back end, the production side of things.
production side. Yeah, exactly. And that's where I like realized is like, hey, there's cool things to do here as a non-creative in a creative world. And that was kind of the original like love ultimately of the arts and kind of how it worked and what it could mean. Um, but that's kind of like where my, you know, started seeing an interest there in college ultimately. But then I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm not going to go do production right out of school. And I had no idea actually that I would end up back in it. I like thought I was just like, I'm gonna go to move to San Francisco and start building tech companies. What I'm gonna go do, because like that seemed cooler than
Uh,
going to work in finance in New York. And this is like, this is 2011. Like I was like the black sheep that like, Alan, you're not going to finance. Like what the heck? Like this is before like startups became
yeah,
cool. Like Google
yeah.
was like still small at this point.
Yep, 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 yep.
Um, and I was like, guys, I'm moving to San Francisco. I think like three of my friends moved to San Francisco out of like a class of like, thousands. Like it was very few of us,
Yeah.
or at least people that, and so I started doing the tech company thing and did it worked on small companies, big companies, but eventually knew I wanted to start my own thing, which is how I got to FilmHub. Yeah.
And that is what comes up next.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit more about that. I like how you transition that into, and you're
Yeah.
right,
Sorry, there's a lot of skips in there in the middle there.
but you
Yeah.
transition very well because I was gonna when you started talking about it, I was like, okay, I think next is gonna come up now. Let's talk about Film Hub and how you
Yeah.
got to that.
Yeah, so I took a weird career where I did a really cool program out of undergrad that I got into at Intuit, which is like a rotational program through product management and marketing. Met some amazing people, some amazing mentors of mine that really took me under their wing. Um, I followed over one of them to a company called SugarSync. We did like a full turnaround of a cloud storage company, and I got my real Silicon Valley MBA of like turning around a company that was not doing well
Mm,
in that time, and we sold it off. It was a good success. And I basically realized at that point I was like, okay, I love small companies. This is what I enjoy. That's really
okay,
my passion. And so did a couple other ones. One got successfully acquired by King. I was like a analytics marketing automation company, and then I worked on the Cash App at Square for a
okay.
while, and was kind of doing the big scale up thing. And then it was like, hey, time to. When I left Square, I was like, okay, what do I really want to do? Like, I got to just do the damn thing. I got to go start a company. Got to go do it, and was playing around with different ideas, meeting a bunch of folks, and actually a friend of mine from Penn introduced me to my co-founder Klaus. Klaus is a world-renowned composer, buying 10 times cooler than I am, buying Pirates of the Caribbean, Gladiator, Thin Red Line, Mission Possible 2. And he had this really kind of interesting business that he was starting. And I was like, I dug in. I was like, Klaus, like, let's go do this. And that was late 2019. And we both went full time January of 2020 on FilmHub.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and FilmHub, we're an all rights film distributor. We help filmmakers get their films on streaming services around the world. And that's a whole very complex process of you licensing the film, preparing it for marketing,
yeah.
getting deliverables ready, royalties, collections, payments, legal rights, everything, all built into one kind of technology and sales platform ultimately
Mhm,
as well.
mhm. And it's like revolutionizing the game right now. I heard in regards to helping like creators monetize their content. Obviously, also retaining their rights as well too, which is a very big thing within the industry as a whole. But obviously,
Totally.
still I'm talking about film and stuff like that. What challenges you faced in the development of this platform?
So I think the biggest piece, right, is in order to build Film Hub, we had to build it partially from Hollywood, partially from San Francisco, we say, right? It's like had to have technology, but it also had to have the Hollywood LA sales aspect of relationship building and getting it going. And you can't, film as an industry that you got to play the game.
Mm, true,
And it's
true,
a
true,
game
true.
of hustle, it's a game of work. You got to really get your teeth deep in it. And we, I think that's the hardest thing is ultimately it's a film is an industry based on relationships, and getting those moving and doing it well takes time. Relationships
Yeah,
just take time. And that's the hardest piece is like we see, building Film Hub into a massive company is like it's going to take years ultimately. It's not something that happens overnight. You can have a company in some things that, if you're a purely technology based company, you can build it and all of a sudden just takes off and you're okay sometimes.
true,
But like
true. But other things that are
in
built on relationship and connections is it's a lot harder.
it's a lot harder.
It's
And
not like
that's
a
really
yeah. I
And
get
that's
you.
where ultimately the thing is, we have a business that's partially relationship based and partially technology based. And so it makes it difficult. Those are the hardest things ultimately when we come down to it is like, it's we are fighting tooth and nail and it's gritty and hard. And
Mm,
but at the same time, because of the fact that things are gritty and hard, you have lasting success when you do it well. And, one of our investors says to me all the time, he's like, Alan, like, if you guys do this well, like, and you stay alive and you do strongly, like, this is it. And we're in the point
yeah.
where we're going to stay alive for a very long time, which is good.
Okay. Well, shout out to Film Hub. Shout out to Film Hub. I know that talk to us a little bit more about like how film distribution has worked in the past and how because we were talking about rights and content and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Film distribution in the past to where you guys come in now and
Yeah.
revolutionize that and push
Yeah.
the boundaries on distribution.
Yeah, totally. So, um, film is really complicated. I'll like not to get too complicated, but generally outside of the major studio system, when you finance a film, is you finance it, you produce the film, and then you give it over to a sales agent. That sales agent then goes and sells you territory by territory to different distribution companies because guess what? The culture is different in St. Lucia. The culture
Yeah.
is different in
Yeah.
Brazil. The people are there, and that's the reason that system exists. Well, guess what? Over time, that's kind of changing, right? And what we're seeing is now with the evolution of bigger streaming platforms, connected TVs, the you're able to kind of, how should I say, localize content quicker. Content
Mm,
resonates more across different audiences. And so that's
okay.
beginning to change. But a lot of the, distribution landscape is still playing the same old game. And so we've said the thing is, we'll play the same old game, but we're also playing for the next 5 to 10 years. And so we've had to build the standard, go sell a film, right territory by territory. We do that. But we're
Mm,
also thinking about this, how do we automate this process at scale in the next 10 to 15 years? And that's how we kind of ultimately different, where we have to play the same game. This is where I talked about the, you know, relationship piece
yep.
with the technology is we have to do both at the same time in order to really scale and build because you can't change the film industry without being within it. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, you gotta yeah. And then that's how you gotta build trust. You gotta be inside of it. You can't be on the sidelines like, hey, look, come to us. We don't
Yeah.
even know who you are.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And you're trying to help other filmmakers get their stuff out there, but again, it costs money and it costs time. So building those relationships where someone's going to be willing to put some money aside to make this happen, this dream happen,
Yeah.
in a sense, you have to really build that trust. And
And
without
that's
that
where
trust, extremely hard.
Yeah, and that's where it starts with for us in the film industry, it starts with my co-founder Klaus, right? Like this guy's, he's produced over 100 films or, produced or composed for over 100 films. And, that comes with a lot of, a lot of gravitas there. And that's where we're lucky to have that turbo start with the company and having an excellent, a great marriage of technology and relationships, both in
Okay.
one.
Now, how do you build trust? In this industry for you guys directly, like what's making you guys so special,
Yeah.
and how you building that trust, um, and how your company has excelled because of that.
Yeah. Very good question.
Because a lot of
This is
filmmakers, and creators, that's one of the biggest issues we face out here. We're like, okay, who do we go to? Who can we trust? Everyone says they can get the job done. Everyone says they can.
everyone.
That's the
Yeah.
line in the industry. Oh, come on, I got you. I can make that happen tomorrow. I got some connections over here. Then before you do it, you're like investing. You're feeling like this person possibly can guide you in the right direction, and then you come to find out this person doesn't know anything,
Yeah.
or they lead you in the wrong direction.
It's honestly, it's like it's the tale of immigrants, underrepresented folks. Honestly, it's like it's the promise. People sell a promise, right? And artists, creatives are always oversold on something.
Mm,
And it sucks because it's just taking advantage of a group that is ultimately, unfortunately, like, doesn't have access to a system that is, you know, the system is not designed for them ultimately. It's designed for those that are in the system.
Hmm.
And that's really where ultimately it comes down to really being direct and honest and transparent with folks. And
Okay.
that's something that ultimately most people just aren't willing to be because they know and they've learned that they can oversell somebody and it doesn't hurt them in the butt. And that's ultimately a really just messed up part of the industry. And it's just like, so it's funny. I say I've talked myself out of deals sometimes where I'll be like, listen, here's the real details of how this might go. This and this and this. I'm not going to sell you over on this. Like, if you want me to say, hey, I'm going to go make this into a massive success, I'm not going to exactly tell you that because I don't know. It
True.
might work, but we believe it could,
Yeah.
but that level of transparency is something that most people don't have in this industry. And that's where things ultimately, is just necessary. It's being direct and honest and open and just saying like, hey,
I
this
mean,
could
it's your
work.
reputation too. Like you,
Yeah.
you want to constantly be the person to say you could over deliver and then don't even deliver. Because then
And
that person tells the next person. The next filmmaker says, "Oh, I have this guy. His name's Alan. He's phenomenal." That word of mouth travels, especially within this industry, and especially if you're the person claiming to do it at that high level.
I deem if it's like you can have a short career in film by being very overselling, or you can have a long career by giving them the direct word of like where you think it's going.
Hmm.
And I think that is one of the very key things that ultimately, like, our business in film, like, we rely on the fact that we're open and transparent with filmmakers.
Now,
And
oh, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, and like that's where like it comes down to just the transparency is so key, because no one wants to be in a world where you're hiding stuff. People just want to know people want the real.
Yeah, and
you know
that's obviously one of the reasons why Zaka was formed.
yeah.
We really want to create that transparency with our first and second generation immigrants and anyone who else who wants to just join in on the platform. It's open to everybody, but just having that level of transparency and expressing those real life stories like how you're expressing right now, and whether it be on the business side of things or within the culture where you come from and how you had to adjust to the U.S. or even in Brazil, we want to kind of create that transparency as much as possible for our members. Now, I know transparency and all these other skill sets that you acquired. Do you feel you acquire that through the journey of being in other corporate settings, working for other businesses? Do you feel like that has helped you become a better leader in a sense?
Good
Have those
question.
jobs prepped you? Matter of fact, for Film Hub,
Yeah.
that's the real
Yeah, good
question.
question. So I think the most interesting thing, right? So like I treated my career as a series of learning experiences. I was like, someone gave me a great advice once. It was say, hey, you got to pick, and this is, I think, fairly common advice shared amongst many things. Like, you got to pick if you're in a place to learn or if you're in a place to do in this job. And
Huh?
prior to Film Hub, I said, hey, I'm really in the place of learning. Like, I just want to like learn from people around me, see what works, see what doesn't, because I'm a type of person that like I am a total entrepreneurial type. I can't sit still in a classroom. I can't like sit in front of a book. I was a horrible student at Penn. um,
Alan, get out of class.
yeah, exactly. And
Thank you.
but you put me down and like in the real world, actually learning something and like doing it, I learned really quickly.
Mhm.
And that's where I like my old jobs. Like those were all like very much learning experiences. And I think I was almost like I over indexed on kind of learning earlier in my career. I almost wish that I had like gone down the entrepreneurial venture early. It's one thing I like kind of kick myself a little bit.
Just to
But
let you know, you did pretty good. I'm
thank
just
you.
gonna let you know right now. You see, you kicking yourself in the butt because you ain't doing. I'm just gonna let you know you're doing really good. So for not joining in earlier in the game, you're doing pretty well.
Thank you, thank you. The little bit of imposter syndrome kicks in there, so I
I
appreciate
had
you.
to help my brother out. I had to jump in. I said, hold on now, Paul. We on a
Yeah.
platform. Let's make sure we keep it true. You're doing a really good job. You're doing a really
Oh,
good job.
thank you, thank you.
Mm,
But that's kind of like, I definitely think I learned so much. I mean, like I was incredibly grateful to some of the folks that I worked with. I really had some amazing, mentors that really kind of helped me, especially a guy I worked with at Intuit who recruited me over to Sugar Sync, guy by the name of Mike Grossman, just like forever shout out to as one of like fathers in my career and just a brilliant, person that saw me at an early age.
mm, yeah, okay. Now you're a part of. Do apologize for that. You're a part of several different teams, right? And teams, when I say like when you're working on these projects, working with um, different, trying to get different distributions, things like that. Talk to us a little bit more about how do you manage the team aspect? How do you become a team player and make sure that you're making the best decisions for the team?
Oh, good question. Well, it depends what the makeup of the team is the first thing, right? It's like, is this the team that is knows exactly what they're doing and I need to just kind of like give them a direction and, say get out of the way? Do we need this to be the team that ultimately is doesn't know what they're doing yet and I need to actually be a bit more of the coach? I think that's the biggest thing is realizing what the makeup of your team is and being able to adapt in that way.
Hmm.
And, you talked a little bit about like relationship building and like that's one of the biggest things that I think is absolutely key at the beginning is like you really I think as early Allen would have just started like bulldozing ahead and just going straight to like I got to take the front here. But I think the biggest thing that I've
And most
learned over
most people would too.
yeah, yeah.
If you're very
Um
eager, you're like, I finally get an opportunity to lead. Let me lead. So I
yeah.
get it. That would happen. But
Yeah.
now you have a different approach. Your walk is different, like your father said.
Exactly, yeah,
I'm watching.
and,
I'm catching you right now. I'm
there you
catching
go.
you. Let's
There
go.
you go. But I think now it's like now it's kind of understanding like I gotta get the makeup of the team. What's really happening? Who, does this are they proven in this? Do I need to show them how it's done? Do I think they know how it's done? Those are all the things that I gotta, ultimately evaluate and assess ultimately. And also like, hey, a lot of the times now as a leader, right, I'm trying to train them up because I don't want to have to make every decision. I want them to learn how to make the good decision so that because that's actually how I scale myself, right?
Hmm.
And learning that is like as an entrepreneur is really painful, honestly. Like that's hard. Like,
Yeah.
you can ask anyone who's worked at an early stage company, and people probably still say the same thing here. Is like Alan's a tough nut to crack sometimes, and is really like opinionated and detail oriented, and um, but once they kind of get to know me, they and realize like actually I'm trying to pull the details out of them and get them to understand, and like so they learn like, hey, these are the reasons why I think in this way and why I do that. That's kinda where I think it actually, things get much better ultimately, and you gotta be open and honest about that and direct with
Yeah.
people, like, that's the thing
Yeah.
I've really learned is the key is just, like, if you share that, like, "Hey, listen, you might find this opinionated, but this is why I think this because of X, Y, and Z reason, and, like, please tell me as to why you don't you may not agree with that." It's a very different conversation than just saying, "Go do this."
And like you said, conversation. Keyword.
Conversation. Conversation.
Conversation. That's right. We get to go
Conversation,
back and
and
forth. We get to go back and forth. It's not an argument. It's a conversation, and it's okay to have differences, especially because not everyone thinks the same, right? And no one will
totally.
ever think the same, right? So it's important to know other people's perspectives and kind of collaborate those perspectives to make the best decision possible for the team, for the company, or for the movement in general.
Yeah, and I think and talking on that, like I think one of the biggest things that I've really learned about that having a conversation is like the hardest piece is sometimes as a leader, people below you don't necessarily think that it can be a conversation. And it's just like you're in a position of power and like you say something and you forget that, oh, snap, they're not going to think to push back on this. And it's like, you'll say something and people will be like, I say, I don't have any questions. And then everyone's like,
Staring up.
crickets.
Yeah,
Crickets.
yeah, yeah.
And it's because people are afraid ultimately of saying something that they think that I might think is dumb. And like, no, I actually think it's dumb that no one's asking questions.
That's
To even
right.
know.
Every time I do a seminar and I finish a seminar, I say, "All right, does anybody have any questions?" Everybody. But then, mind you, at the end, everyone's like, "Yo, I should have asked that question. I should have said something." But that's how we build a community, by
Yeah.
conversation, talking through stuff, working through things, right? So I could only
Yeah.
imagine you in a team meeting, and you're like, you give this whole presentation. You're like, "All right, does everyone have any questions?" And everyone's like, "You're like, did I do a
I
good
got
job?"
my people that I know ask the questions, and
That's
I'll
right.
call on them sometimes to get it started.
And
But
that's right. Someone gets it started, and then all of a sudden, the next person raises their hand. I like how you
yeah.
doing that. You said I got the key people.
I mean, it's a real thing, right?
Yo,
It's
that's
like
crazy. You got
it's
those
a
3 or 4 people that you know in the office that you can be like, "So Sarah, what do you think?" And she's like,
exactly.
"Oh, me?
Yeah.
I'm ready to talk." That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Um,
And
go ahead.
breaking that ice is key.
I was gonna ask the question now, like coming from an immigrant background, right? And
Mhm.
obviously, I know you said you were going back and forth between the states and obviously Brazil, but like, what were some of the challenges you faced, like developing your company, but more importantly, like just being a part of this industry, right? Coming from that
Yeah.
immigrant background.
Yeah, it's interesting. So like I think the biggest part for me was like I've never fully understood like I've always been in this weird partial American, partial Brazilian background, kind of like in this like feeling like a bit of an imposter on both sides
Hmm.
ultimately. And that was like just kind of funky for me ultimately. And so I think like, I've definitely been in a lot of times where I am, get a good suntan on me and I am, feeling I'm feeling very dark skinned in some instances. I've also had the other instances where, people in like Brazil, like I'll like be talking and they'll say like, oh, he's an American. He doesn't, his accent is very Americanized and it's like both sides. And so I've gotten it from both sides of the angle.
Hmm.
And that's like a just kind of funny place to be ultimately, where, you don't feel at home fully in either way. And that's like it's a weird thing.
Yeah, so that
Um,
uncertainty,
yeah,
you just don't know what's gonna happen. Mind you,
yeah.
you're probably the best person for the job. You're the probably have some really great things to talk about and say and add to this conversation, but then you're like, "Ugh, I don't know if I should say that. I don't know if I fit in. Are they looking at me funny? Did they understand me? Did I say the word incorrectly?" It's just a lot of that back and forth that really could throw somebody off. So I could imagine, you being an entrepreneur and being at the level where you are, that
It's funny. It's just it's a weird place to be ultimately. And also like, I think the other piece for me is like I think the hardest piece is like realizing and like this is where like we've hired people internationally as well a lot for like outside the US and also trying to figure out how to build a bridge ultimately has been like one of the like things that's been like really important for us as a company. Like we distribute films that are from 100 plus countries, right? Our team is also, now probably in 20 countries almost. And, in figuring out also like trying to take those learnings, what it felt like for me to be kind of in this weird world of like, where do I feel at home is like, how do they feel at home as well? So like we get our team together a lot. So we do a lot of like international trips where people like will all go meet up in a certain place and work for like a week at a time.
that's nice.
And it's a cool way to like see a bunch of different cultures, but you're also like for each person that arrives there, it's a very different experience. And it's like for some of them, it's the first time traveling abroad,
Have
right?
you gone to Brazil?
Brazil is on the list for next
Okay,
year.
I'm
Brazil
just
is
trying
on
to.
the list for next year. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I'm just making sure
We
we're
are
getting there.
we are making sure to not do it in the heat of summer, so it's not 115 degrees down in Rio. But
Ooh.
it's on the list for next year.
Okay, I
Yeah.
give you that. Okay, I like that. I like that. When we were early in our conversation, when you talked about filmmakers and we talked about like the transparency, and we talked about building trust, we talked about like really fighting for their rights in regards to their content and obviously like their payments and stuff like that, receiving that. Why is that so important to you? I
Yeah.
didn't ask that back then, but I was thinking about it now. Like, why is that so important? Like, why is your company saying, let's put this in the forefront? Now I know it hasn't been looked at in the forefront for a
Yeah.
lot of times in this industry, but you're saying we're gonna put this first, and everything else will fall into place.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things to this. There's one, like, part of the story, like, is my co-founder Klaus, like, who, came from the film industry and, you know, didn't get paid on a number of deals, didn't get, what was rightfully entitled to him because people are just honestly, unfortunately, very crooked in this industry. Everyone has a trauma story in film. Everyone does. And, from my side, the biggest thing was like, I always like, I mentioned a lot of things of like, I always kind of felt a little bit outside the circle, right?
Mm,
And like, I said, it never fully felt like it fit in San Diego. Um, I, in high school and in Brazil, I was like still fully feel like I fit in. And it's like kind of like this constant, like little bit of do I fit in? And so like when we talk about our filmmakers ultimately, making sure that they fit in and making sure that they are getting everything in transparent ways so that at least makes them feel like, hey, I'm being treated just as anyone else is the key.
okay.
And that's where a lot of this comes from is like, we want to make sure that everyone has the same experience. And it's not about where that person came from, what they did before. It's really about, does their film have an audience? That's really where it comes down to it. It's like, we want to leave that as the ability for, good art to shine through. That's how I think about it.
And you probably have to tell people no at that point in time if you feel like it's not gonna work.
Well, we tell them, yeah, we tell them, hey, like, it's like, listen, like, this is what it is. Here's the numbers, right? If you show them, here's the numbers. Unfortunately, some folks won't listen to that, right? Because like they're just, you know, they
Convince,
they're
convince.
convinced
Yep.
ultimately that it's going to be that way. And like I think that's honestly this one of the saddest things that you see is that when you tell a filmmaker, hey, like, I'm sorry, but like this just didn't hit, didn't make it, didn't do well. And
That's a tough
you
conversation
it's a
right
tough
there.
conversation. And especially when people have, overinflated expectations, et cetera, it's a really tough one. Um, but that's where, it just comes down to, for everyone to have the humility and realize like, guess what? That happens on the biggest productions in the world too. So many things have to go right in order for success to happen.
Yeah.
And
And we're talking about bigger budgets too.
yeah, bigger budgets too.
So imagine that getting cut or not making it to the front line after that big budget was spent.
I mean, hey, the Joker this past weekend didn't do nearly as well as everyone thought it was going to be. That's going to,
Yeah.
and so it can happen anywhere.
Yeah. And then the movie gets pulled. Yeah, it's we don't know. Society changes so quickly.
Yeah.
What we think might sell today, tomorrow. Like you said, the Joker. Everyone's like, wow, the Joker, right? But
Yeah.
you've
I mean,
you have a very hard job.
yeah,
Shout out to
yeah,
you on that, right? Well, how would your
yeah.
Brazilian heritage influence your leadership skills and entrepreneurial skills?
Oh man. I think the biggest thing for me is like I'm the total extroverted Brazilian. Like that's just who I am. Like
I think a lot of Brazilians are like that.
yeah, it's just like I'm
Music comes on, it's just like
yeah. Yeah.
the vibe is real.
I get called the over caffeinated CEO sometimes, and and I've come to embrace it. It's fine as like I'm sitting here having my third cup of coffee, and I think that's one thing that comes, and it just comes. What that means is for me, it's the extroversion is just like sitting down and getting to know people is like the key, right? It's like really realizing that hey, I got to get to know the people around me.
Mhm.
And that's where I think the biggest key for me is like, that kind of culture of everyone around all the time in Brazil, like,
Yeah.
showing up to, you know, post 3 p.m. lunch at home and all of a sudden like everyone's in the house and you're like, well, what's going on here? And like, and
We're just having
that's
lunch.
where that kind of like just that warmth ultimately of everyone and just bringing the group together. is a key. And, and it's also just like making, realizing, I think that, Brazilians are very good about making everyone feel welcome, regardless of background, anything within that.
Mhm.
And, I talked a lot about like, when I like showed up in Brazil, like, and went to high school there, I was like, oh, I feel like I'm an outsider, but I feel so welcomed at the same time. And that's, I think, where I think that definitely had a pretty profound impact on like how I try to bring the team together ultimately. May not do it all the time, but I try to make it happen.
Now you had a lot of success, and we talked about some of them today, right? Had a lot of success, but like, what advice would you give to other immigrant entrepreneurs who are looking to build their own business?
One, I think the thing is, right, realize the number of folks that come from, that come from backgrounds where their parents are immigrants, they were immigrants, anything, and like realize that that's most of the businesses in the US, or at least a high percentage of them,
Yep,
right? I think the numbers or stats are crazy,
facts.
right? And there's a hustle. There's a hustle that like ultimately when you're a little bit outside the system, you've got an extra piece of hustle that you want to get done and
Yeah,
utilize that. It's I think it's a very good thing ultimately. It's it's the same, it's that on I just think that like anyone that is not that came from like kind of outside the system in some little bit of a way is generally somebody who's got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder that wants to go further.
I give you that. I give you that. Yeah, I give you
and
that. Good
and
way of
and
breaking it down.
utilize that chip in a good way.
Okay.
And that is, I think, it's not a don't be angry at the system, don't be angry at the thing, but just utilize it, saying like, hey, I'm going to do this. That's the
Yeah.
key.
You're right. As an entrepreneur, like you just got to get up and get it done.
Yeah.
End of the day.
You just
Because
can't get angry. The thing is,
yeah,
too many people get angry and just complain about it.
yeah.
That's the
And
thing. Is just
I,
like, don't be loud and annoying about it. It's just like, hey, this is how it kind of works. But guess what? I'm going to make it right.
and you
That's
got
a
to
very
expect
different
that as an
attitude.
entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You run your own business, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be things that you're gonna be learning for the first time or doing for the first time. You can't expect greatness on the first time. Granted, we talked about that a little earlier. Sometimes people get that one shot in and they're like, "Whoo, they made it." But
Yeah.
as an entrepreneur, we're constantly evolving, constantly growing. So even if you get success on the first time, there's still another benchmark to reach, right? But you have to, like you said, just be accept where you are, be happy with what the outcome is, and just know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. You just got to keep
Yeah.
going forward,
Yeah. It's just
which is
keep
always
cranking.
very hard because you're like, I got to put more money up, I got to invest, I got to. But that's probably the biggest thing anyone could ever do, and that's mentors are always tell me all the time. They're like, look, the biggest investment is on yourself. So doing that.
Very true to
Um,
that.
thinking bringing it to the last question right now, like looking ahead, right? What is the future aspirations when it comes to Film Hub, and how do you plan to continue like supporting filmmakers in as we increase in like the digital and globalized film market?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, like, what are we here to do? We're gonna build the biggest film distribution company in the world. That's what we're doing.
Okay, let's
And
speak it like that. Let's come on.
yeah, I mean, I think the basic thing that we say is like Film Hub will ultimately be if you're a filmmaker, you're either gonna be, distributing directly with us or you're gonna be taking a major studio deal. And those are the two options at the end of the day. We've done a right thing and we've changed the way that ultimately filmmakers, have a really good chance of success at that. That's
Well,
what we want
you also forgot the third option. You're either gonna be sitting at home and watching it on TV.
to do. Yeah.
Because you didn't want to work with us.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Alan, I just want to say thank you so much for just being present, sharing your time and your knowledge and your information. You definitely have a vibrant energy that glows around you. So I could only imagine your team hopefully has got a little bit of that percentage of what you got right there. Because if it's like this every day for you, that's already a vibrant energy that's in that office. and with all those projects that you got going on. Because sometimes it can get a little bit overwhelming. But having someone like you on the team and having someone like you leading the team, I could only imagine the success that you guys are going to have at Film Hub.
I'm lucky to have some great teams, so I owe it all to them.
Well, Alan, I just want to finish off by saying thank you again. And I want to let the listeners know if you want to hear more inspirational stories like Alan, please check us out on ZakaConnect.com. Follow our social at Zaka Connect and follow our feed, Zaka, wherever you listen to your podcasts.